Those are the green cards I have for this public comment section. If anyone else would like to submit a public comment card, please do so at this time. Ms. O'Kelly.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. I am not as pessimistic about these plans as Sonia was, and I very much appreciate the opportunity for input. As you know, the packets came out very late, so tonight I am not speaking for anyone other than myself, because I have not had an opportunity to consult with my colleagues in the Senior Center. If you have these on your computer, it will make it easier. My particular comments are referring to the two plans, floor plans. One is on page 29 of the packet, one on page 31. Both of those seem to have sufficient space for the Senior Center. And so I would hope I am correct in making an assumption that once the space and the general outline of the building is confirmed by the township, by the task force, and perhaps by the township board, that we will have an opportunity for additional input in how to configure that space. The two priorities I want to address are therefore having a separate entrance and parking area for seniors, and the two, how the two layouts compare with the needs that we've expressed. Regarding entrances and parking, neither plan is adequate. I hope we have emphasized that previously. This should not come as a surprise. The reasons we want a separate entrance and separate parking: the entrance is for safety and security. The parking is so that we don't have to go through a lot of other cars, community cars, when we have a full community center, in order to get to the Senior Center. I have a lot of suggestions on how to configure those. I would be glad, very happy to work with the consultants on doing that. The first plan also, it has two entrances, but the way it's configured, if you look at the community entrance, either the community would have to go through the center to get to their meeting spaces, or they would have to go all the way around through the gym space. That doesn't make any sense to me. The second plan has no separate entrance. I wish I could go around here, but one could be added symmetrically opposite to the current entrance, designed entrance, and have the space reconfigured for a vestibule and so forth. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I've got it. I'm available.
Thank you very much. Ma'am.
Change my mind.
Oh, please.
Okay. Suzanne Lealoha, and I live in Lake of the Hills. One of my concerns looking at these plans was that it separates our Senior Center staff from us, from the Senior Center itself. The warming kitchen is completely separate. We'd have to key card in and out to get to that. And I agree with Barb and Sonia both, is that they really don't take into consideration what we've been trying to share with everybody, that we really do want our own space together. Access looks awkward we have a lot of people that use walkers, and we have had people before in wheelchairs, and that's a long distance for them to have to go each time, especially in the winter. And not having access to our senior staff, like Sherry and Allie, or we have to key card in and out, we talk to them all the time. We're constantly interacting with them. So, but thank you. And I did want to, are you the superintendent for Okemos? I wanted to say thank you for letting us have that space for all these years. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wishing to make remarks at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public remarks at 6:11 PM. Next on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by member Vagnozzi. Do we have a second? Second. Second by member Robertson. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Next on our agenda is item 5, approval of the minutes. We do have one set of minutes from our February 25th meeting. Do we have a motion on the minutes this evening? Member O'Farris.
I move to approve the February 25th minutes from our last meeting.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Seconded by member Nagasetti. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the motion carries. And I'll add a special thank you to our staff for adding an additional set of minutes to their already overworked workload. We certainly appreciate it, and it's been very helpful to me, and I'm sure to members of the public who are following along at home. Communications from the public. There were several communications that were included in our packet. As this may be our final meeting, we don't know. I'll also mention that at our places was a letter dated March 11th from Barbara O'Kelly, which I will ask staff to include in our packet when it's finally posted or added to the packet so that it's available for public consumption as well. Without objection, that will be done. Next is item 7. Item 7 is the bulk of our agenda this evening, and that is the senior community center recommendation to the board. And for an introduction, we'll turn things over to Director of Planning and Community Development.
Thank you. I will be brief in my introduction here because no one is here to see me this evening. They're here to listen to our consultants, but I want to follow up on a few of the things that have been floating around out there from the last meeting and previous meetings. And I'm going to go ahead and bury the lead and work this in reverse order of my memo. So there was a question about solar at one point, and staff had neglected to follow up on that. And so we wanted to circle back to that question. The calculations you see in your memo are from Progressive. That is the rough cost to solar the project. We haven't gotten too deep into the woods yet. I can't tell you all that's going to fit, but this is how you would plan for it, right? Make sure that you've upgraded the steel, make sure that you got the roof space. This is how much per kilowatt hour we're looking at. So it's about a $1.5 million add to the budget. And so happy to discuss that further. Progressive is here as well. They can discuss that as we move forward. So operations and staffing, we've had multiple conversations around this over the course of the last couple meetings. Couple pieces to this. On the operations, the ongoing operations side, we have about $550,000 in the fund balance for the existing community services millage. And so there are certainly ways that we can address some of the immediate capital needs or the long-term capital needs through that fund balance, and subsequently then dial back the necessary operating costs in the long-term model. Deputy Manager Opsimer thinks somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.8% on the senior center side and 3.5% on the senior community center side. We'll continue to dial those in, obviously, as the township board gives us some direction on any potential millage requests, as we're going to need to dial it in pretty specifically. But I do just want to circle back and say there is some scenarios there where we can make some changes on the operational side to save some money. The staffing side, however, we're pretty tight on that right now. There might be a little bit of give in there, but what we're trying to do here is knowing that this is going to be the crown jewel of the community once it gets built, whether it's the senior community center model or the senior center only model, we want to make sure that we can staff it properly. And so the model that we put forward previously is the model we believe from an operations perspective that we need to make that work. Moving on to revenue, apologies, and again, let me apologize off the jump here for the lateness of the packet. We had a lot of moving parts that I was trying to wrangle, and one of the things I missed was we put an old version of the model for revenue in the packet. So the packet and the version that's at your seat are the updated models. This is entirely theoretical. I want to stress that. This is us trying to put together what we think could happen. And Director Wazinski can speak to it further, but it's important to note, at this point, I would not recommend offsetting any operational costs directly with revenue until we have a facility open and we know how much revenue is actually coming in. Because we're making some assumptions in there that those rooms are going to be used a lot. And at a competitive, we think the rates are probably pretty good based on the model we've provided you. Director Wazinski and I have talked, and we are being a little aggressive in how often it might be used. Obviously, especially with the model that shows you 100% usage rate. So that's like the hypothetical maximum that I can say with some confidence we'll never meet in an annual basis. And so the answer is somewhere between that and 0. So it's a big number. So until we have some actual data, we should just assume that revenue will go to fund balance, and it'll help us down the road. And at some point, once we have some working information, we can talk about making changes in the long term to either the millage or the operating budget or however we want to do that. But that's sort of what it would look like at a high level. And then lastly, I want to get back to the building program before I turn it over to Brendan and Adam from Progressive to talk through the two options that you have in front of you this evening. And they can talk about how the flow works and how the building is separated, because again, as a reminder, our charge is to give you an option that you could build either full building or senior center only building. Both these options can do that. But from the building programming perspective, one of the things that Member Robertson pointed out to us at the end of the last meeting was a fundamental misunderstanding on my part as to what the task force was looking for in terms of reduction to both the senior center model and the senior community center model. And so when staff took a step back and looked at that, we realized that very clearly there's no way you can just cut 10 to 15% out of the senior community center model without programmatic changes. And so what you have in your packet this evening are sort of 3 options to get you to that 10 to 15% cut. You would eliminate the item marked community center activity space. You would remove the spectator areas from the gym and part of the youth recreation program area, or you eliminate the whole youth recreation program area, right? That is a gamut of options. But whereas with the senior center in a smaller space, it's a little bit easier to take maybe 50 square feet here and narrow that hallway up and skinny that room up, and all of a sudden, I've saved 1,000 square feet. And it was also relatively easy given that we were taking out the parks offices. So skinning up the senior center model was pretty straightforward. Skinning up the senior community center model we would seek the input and direction of the task force if that is a desired path to take. We'll also point out that, one of the things that we heard all along was we just want the same building, the same size, roughly the same size, replace what we got. And so the models that you have in front of you this evening take the 120 space room, sort of the presentation room, out of the senior center model, and they're only in the community center model. That gets you a senior center that is pretty close to a like-for-like replacement. So reacting to that feedback, and that's what we've brought forward this evening. And this is the point where I will bring Progressive up. As we've settled on the site next to the fire station, fundamentally, the building laid out, these were the 2 ways the building laid out and made sense, right? We looked at a couple of different options for them, and there was a lot of awkward spacing, especially as it relates to the fire department and sort of the long-term plan. The original plan for the fire department was to have a secondary building as you pull out of the doors, so for storage and maintenance and things like that. And so in order to try and maintain that for the long run, we sort of became a little bit pinned on that side, and that led us to these 2 options that Progressive is now going to walk you through. So we'd obviously be happy to answer any questions if you want to get into any of the initial stuff before Progressive comes up.
Yeah, I think let's before you jump up, I appreciate your patience. Task force members, on the high level, are there any questions based on the overall information that we've been presented here before we get into the nitty gritty of the layouts and all of the discussion that the consultants will bring? Yes,
Just
never
have
mind,
a
yes.
clarification, maybe for my own purposes, that the charge of this task force was to come up with two concept solutions to turn over to the board, for the board and staff to work out the details of those plans. So I really appreciate everything that Progressive has done. This, to me, coming from a design construction field, is way over and above, and that's great. But I believe the charge of this task force is not to deal with the specifics of who sits where and some of that, but more the building envelope, to make sure that what's been identified as the functions that are needed are included in those two concepts. Am I on track with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was focused for the discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think too, to the point made earlier, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for public input when plans are presented and finalized, before they're finalized. So I appreciate those comments so that we don't have to get too much in the weeds of things that we're ultimately not going to be in charge of deciding.
Right, yeah, I'll say, in response to those, it's very easy to look at this and say, well, let's move this here, or put a wall there, or slide this over there. But the truth of the matter is that this is a conceptual first pass drawing that our consultants have put together. And the board is still going to have to weigh in on it. The voters will have to weigh in on the financial component, no doubt. And this will no doubt undergo further review and revising prior to the final design being implemented. So I think it is a good idea to sort of focus on the building envelope, the overall general layout of the site, although even that can be changed, as things progress. But this is a good sense of sort of, I think this gives us an opportunity to look at it and say, was everyone heard throughout the process, and does this represent a decent encapsulation of what had been requested along the way? And we can get into some of those details once we've heard a little bit more about what's coming tonight. So please, gentlemen, if you would.
So I'll start here, and then I'll swing around the front of the lectern. Adam Hopkins with Progressive Companies and Brendan Ozunian with Progressive Companies. You're just going to help move stuff? Yeah. Okay. I'd like to reiterate the point that these are conceptual plans showing how the overall building and options could come together as a combined two different program areas, being senior center and community center, how those might sit on the site, and then, again, it's very conceptual. If you look through the floor plans and I hesitate a little bit to even calling them a floor plan, because if you look at the layouts, there's notes where it says a T and an A for areas. There's a target area that is based on the program that we worked through in previous meetings, where we said we need this much space for this activity. So we made a program that had a target, and then each one of these bubbles, they're more squares than bubbles, but each one of those shapes has an A or an area connected to it. The size of your print might be hard to read. You can read them up here, but it's a way for us to make sure that we're kind of honest and say, you know what, we were asking for a 300 square foot space. What we've drawn is 300 square feet. Maybe it's 310 square feet. Maybe it's 290. But it gives us the ability to look at the drawings and compare that to the kind of list of spaces. So I just, again, want to reiterate that there will be more opportunity for input, absolutely. These are conceptual layouts. They're not necessarily floor plans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll bend this up. I'll try, in previous meetings, I've been criticized for not being close enough to the mic, so hopefully it can be picked up. Can you hear better now that I'm up here? Okay, yeah, it might be picking me up. Or you mean, well,
The mic kind of distorts a little bit. I can hear you better.
okay.
Right where you are.
All right. We're gonna start with this concept, and each one of the sets of drawings around the room are identical. I mean, we've got multiple locations. We're starting with the site in the big picture. Go ahead and pull this, up, the whole site. Maybe it's the next sheet.
That's right, I'm sorry.
Yep. So the primary difference between these two sites, one concept has the senior center kind of focused more on the wetland side of the site. You'll see this stormwater retention on both concepts. For the site, we will need a stormwater retention site where stormwater goes, and we'll have a pond basically back in the back portion. We actually have wetlands on either side, a floodplain. So this is where, no matter what we do with the building, this is where stormwater will be. So on this concept, we're putting senior center with most of its visual focus to wetlands, and it's really the quieter side of the site. On this concept, the senior center is up closer to the road. It has a section of trees and a kind of that buffer before the post office, but it is far more immediate as you enter the site by the road. So that is one of the significant differences, or really the main difference between the two sites. The senior center up here versus community center. One of the aspects of, then you see parking on how that develops as we move the building towards the road. And as Tim mentioned, we need to kind of protect some opportunities for possible expansion of the fire department. So I'll keep coming back to this one as the first one. We've got parking up here, but stormwater coming back. In this, we're setting up kind of sections of the parking lot. So it may not be terribly evident, but conceptually we've got swales, which go ahead and pan it down if you could, Tim. We've got the images here showing some of those site features that we're talking about. So separating kind of the senior parking from some of the community parking, we're proposing a swale as a spot to handle some of the storm water that's in the lots up here, and create this buffer between the parking zones. And then there's actually a sidewalk that runs along that green zone up to the front door. And so that element, those elements are part of dealing with stormwater and how the site is organized. On this concept, excuse me, hopefully I make it through the presentation. On this concept, the parking lot itself would have islands in it, tree islands like you would see with trees and landscaping. But because we can taper the parking a little bit and allow some of the water to come around here, we may not need as many swales in this concept. So it's a beautiful feature. It helps to mitigate stormwater and helps to create a very, in my opinion, an attractive element within a parking zone, but there is a cost to it. And so we look at different options on how we handle stormwater. So again, the differences on the site, this one has the senior center up near the front. This one has the senior center back with more of a focus on the wetland area. Any questions on, sorry, yes, question.
Member Bagnosi.
Clarify that the purple-violet line is at the wetland demarcation?
The purple-violet line here is actually the 100-year floodplain. So that line is more than a wetland. That's the line we cannot build in.
Right, okay.
It's a 100-year floodplain.
All right.
And you can see we're showing coming near that because that's the area that we can impact for stormwater. Does that answer your question?
So, yeah, it's not an issue to have the retention pond in that.
Correct. Well,
Within
that's
that
because it actually dips
Oh, okay.
down and comes around. That's a little bit higher. The site is absolutely challenging because there is high water table and we've got 100-year floodplain here. So there's limited opportunities and we're taking advantage of the opportunities that we have on the site. But that's what those lines represent.
Any other initial questions? Yes, Member Mason.
Is the square footage basically the same on both drawings?
Yes. Yes.
Same square footage for both, either just the senior center. In both of them, it is the same square footage, and the whole combined as a whole is the same square footage.
Right, okay, thank you.
Member Steve.
Could you show us where the senior center parking would be on the second drawing over there?
On this one?
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, that is certainly more blended. The front door is here, the main entrance to the building is here. And so I would say that zone in the center would be focused for handicap accessibility. And so this concept does have a more blended parking.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Vagnozzi.
I notice on these plans, there's a fair amount of roadway that's right up against the sidewalk. Is that a requirement or a design choice? The reason I ask is the ideal situation for somebody that has mobility issues is to not have to traverse any extra distance. And on the plan 2, there's a bunch of parking that meets that need. It's right up to a sidewalk. Unfortunately, it's just not close to the senior center portion. On the other plan, I don't think there's any parking that's against the sidewalk. But the question for now, and I realize we're in a very preliminary state. Is there anything any requirement that would prevent us from putting parking spaces against the sidewalk?
It can be configured in different ways.
Okay.
It could certainly bring some parking, and you're referring similar to this.
Right.
We could look at a portion of that. It's just a different configuration. This is the most efficient to get the maximum number of spaces. And so we could look at how much do we want for a drop off and how many spaces do we want to kind of nose up to that, the sidewalk. So the answer is, we have options.
Okay, there's nothing that says that would prevent it. If it made sense.
Correct.
Okay.
I think to Member Vagnozzi's point, and maybe to what you're saying too, currently it appears as though the driveway is configured up against this, in diagram number 2, is configured up against the sidewalk and the parking is across that from there. You could reconfigure it such that the driveway went around the outside ring and the parking was pushed up closer if needed, correct? It might just lose a space or two here or there.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a possibility.
We would need a drive that goes parallel to the building. You could put a row of parking that is either, perpendicular, similar to this. We could move the drive back, but we wouldn't dead end a parking bay and, each
Into the
one.
sidewalk.
Yeah, we would need a drive that finished it off.
Got
You
it.
could definitely do that to where that
Yes.
parking, to Adam's point, it noses up to that sidewalk, right?
Right.
There's plenty of, a barrier-free entranceway, at many different points, whatever that looks like, we have options with that.
Sure.
But then right behind that, on the bumper side of the vehicles, then as they're pulling in, we have to have a drive there for fire trucks, for emergency vehicles, and all that. That has to be right behind that first row. So, and that's what I was trying to say, we can't just have, parking line going up and then turn around to where you can't, you have to have an emergency vehicle to be able to get by.
Thank you. Yeah, so I agree that the first concept seems to have a much more natural flow for what could be construed as senior center parking as opposed to general center parking, and the second one doesn't. I think, we can also address that with signage after the fact too, if we need to, if we want to, designate spaces or designate areas for senior parking. But the second plan definitely doesn't encapsulate what I think had been asked for that would be a dedicated parking area. And that's tough to enforce anyway, right? That's a challenge to keep it enforced in that way. But certainly, the intent can be there. The other question I had was related to the second diagram appears to have a connection to the Mall Ring Road, and the first diagram doesn't. But that there does appear to be space to the north of the proposed wetland boardwalk to do that. Is there a reason why that wasn't included, or?
Just to give us the opportunity for discussion. One, this is actually on the private property. It's, the ring road, I don't believe is a public road, and so that would have to be negotiated. And it would certainly come with a cost. The pavement of the road to get there has a dollar amount. And so both of them, as you observed, are laid out in a way that we could make that connection. We didn't show it on one so that we'd have this conversation.
Yeah. I think in general, my preference would be to include it if we could. And I don't know what obviously there's some financial aspect to it that we'll touch on later. But, we have the marketplace on the green, which is, just a stone's throw around that ring road from this proposed site. And it feels like a much more contiguous, area for us if we can find a way to do that. But that's just my opinion.
And that's one thing too, with both of these options, the overall site, right, we have a 100-year floodplain, we have wetlands that are kind of in this U shape on the bottom of this, and then we have obviously the post office, and we have the fire station. We're bounded by certain areas, and so then what Adam has tried to do from that is then take the program space that we have and the parking that we have to do, and then we spent some time with our civil engineering team to look at how much detention do we need to put on the space so that we've accounted for that in the overall design, make sure it all fits on here. And then, exactly to your point, we're showing some different options to drive home some points or to be able to have the discussion, not drive home a point, but to have the discussion, which one looks better, If we showed both with the connection to the ring road, then you wouldn't know what it was without it, right? And so with all of the options, right, it's kind of that give and take. And we need to compare and contrast between them because I'm taking notes as well for all of us to like, okay, we like this and this one, we like that and that one, we like this and that one, whatever it is. So at the end of the day, we can make sure that we arrive at the right decision between both of them.
Other Vegnosi.
Can you identify the entrances on, how are we going to do this to make sure we agree?
We'll say to our left here is A, and to our right is B.
All right, the option that's more of a L, okay, versus angled off. Can you identify where the entrances would be on that?
So on both plans, they're kind of identified with the blue asterisks. So right here is the primary entrance to the building.
Okay, I only see one entrance to that plan,
Yes.
two to the other.
Yes. So,
That's fine. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something.
yes, and to Tim's comments earlier, we have had discussions, I don't know that there's been discussions about how administrative areas could or should be organized, and depending on the size, or depending on if it's a senior only or senior and community center, how that administration, from a cost of operations, how might that be best configured so that redundant services, if it is one program, when I say one program, if it's one building that has both senior and community, having one entrance is more cost-effective way to staff and organize the space. If the choice is made that we want two separate entrances and two separate administrative areas, that can certainly be arranged and worked out.
Okay.
And again, I think to the earlier point as well, just like that connection to the ring road, we're showing two options so that we can talk about it, right? One versus two entries, right? Either of these floor plans can be configured in the future phase, in the next phase of design, to have two or one, as far as entries go, right? And they can't be configured equally.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Member Mason.
We've been at this, it seems like, for a while, and I just really want to commend you and your team for these plans that you have come up with. There's been a lot of input, a lot of different conversations going on, and I know there's tweaking that's going to be happening, so we can't get too dialed into each of the individual details at this particular time, but in general, these concept plans really, I think, hit the mark, in my opinion, for all the things that we've talked about. So I just want to thank you for your fine work.
Yes, Member Hood.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what fellow members said. And I think this is fine work, but I want to make sure that we're not designing the center.
Yeah.
And we're focused on program, like if two entrances is in our program, then that's kind of what we hand off. And the process after we hand it off, to me, I want to make sure is clear to members of the committee and community in terms of if we get too far down this road and spend too much time, and this needs to be there, people are going to be actually voting on the concept and not voting on the plan and not the program. And I want people to be voting on the program and then leave that to the experts and how the township decides to bring in the stakeholders to go through renditions of that planning. I think we'll come out with a much better inclusive senior center or senior/community center. If we start, we'll move this here, move this there, I feel like we're getting out of our lane. And we're going to be then presenting a whole design for people to vote on, which I don't think is our charge. So again, I want to bring it back to conceptually, what do we want in the program? Do we want two entrances and two exits? Yes or no? How that works out in the future, and making it clear to the seniors on when they're going to be brought in for their feedback. And then, the architect works and redesigns and says, how about this? I want to make sure that's clear to the group too.
Thank you. Yes, Member Steve.
Just conceptually, I really like the idea of the senior center having the view and to the pond and to the wetlands rather than a gym that will be enclosed and nobody will have a view of the pond and the wetlands. So just conceptually, I like that feature. And I too appreciate all the work you've done.
Member Narrow-Harris.
I don't know if this is too detailed, but if it ties to program regarding entrances, I have heard the desire to have a separate entrance. From my perspective, unless we have a standalone senior center, that doesn't seem to be an effective option to have two separate staffed entrances. And as a senior, I would be concerned about the security and the safety of an independent entrance. Now, I realize that is not necessarily what everybody's going to agree to, but that, from my perspective, I have some concerns about not having a central entrance that someone is staffing and that possibly people could get into a second entrance that they shouldn't be getting into. That is it.
I guess if we could take a pause from our consultants to just ask about our staffing plan for a senior and community center. The numbers that have been proposed in the packet this evening and at our last meeting, were those inclusive of a two-entrance staffing model, or was that inclusive of a single-entrance staffing model?
So the staffing that is in the task force's packet is inclusive of one entrance. So it's 2 admins to cover, if we're looking at senior and community center, right, we're looking at 6 days at 12 hours a week. That's 72 hours. So that is 2 full-time FTEs just to keep someone at that desk staffing the front reception area for the senior and community center option. So if we're talking about 2 separate entrances, we would need to add an additional admin. And then programmers would have to supplement that admin whenever that admin takes sick time, vacation time, et cetera. Looking more globally at this issue, the township has had conversations. We do have a safety committee that meets regularly. And one thing that our police department has brought to our attention for all township facilities is that having one central point of entrance, ingress and egress to a building is far safer. And so this is a conversation that the township is having internally, and I'm seeing the 2 superintendents nodding their head because this is something that school districts have taken on far before the township ever even started discussing this. But the world's always changing, and this is a concern that employees have. When you have multiple entrances and exits to a building, you are allowing for more people to come and go unnoticed and unseen. So we would strongly prefer from a staff recommendation that we keep one entrance for safety and security purposes. And if we do have a discussion at some point in the future, we would have to discuss the staffing levels if there were a discussion about a second entrance. For the senior-only option that's before you, that would be one entrance, and we would have one admin for the reception desk, because the hours would be essentially as they are today. So our part-time FTE would become a full-time.
Thank you. Member Magnosi.
I apologize for missing the last meeting. When I looked at the notes, the memo, March 7th memo, and, excuse me, minutes from the meeting, it looks like that we will need 6 additional staffers to do a combination senior and community center, if you add up the positions. That's like, it's 8 versus, well, roughly.
25% more, basically. If it's 25% more to add a second entrance, it seems like.
Yes, just for the second entrance, but overall staffing
Yes.
is much higher, a much higher requirement. And I understand the rationale behind it, but it's going to make, I mean, every piece of this, the community center part is significantly more expensive, staffing-wise, construction-wise. Okay.
All right. Any other comments before we dive back in? All right. Turn it back over to you. Thank you.
So now let's, at the risk of getting too deep into the weeds, because these are conceptual, we'll have a look at how we're going to drop these down. So we'll start with what is on the screen, which is this concept here. So this is the concept that actually has the senior center closer to the road. You see a little sliver of the wetland down here, but this has senior center first, near the road. And again, I'll reiterate, these are conceptual layouts. These are boxes that represent the square footage that we had in the program. They can be moved around and reorganized. The primary, the main difference between these two is where the senior center is in relationship to wetland. So on this one, there is one main entrance. the senior and community center, let me say too, if the decision is made that, and the vote is taken that we're only gonna create a senior center, then certainly the way this zone, the administrative zone gets organized changes, because in both concepts, they're utilizing the efficiency of shared space for the two different, the senior and community center. I have heard input too that, maybe there's staff that instead of being in the administrative area, needs to be more in the activity zones. We can work through that, and that'll be part of getting into the details as we actually have a floor plan. So don't fear, these are not. But that being said, conceptually this is a front entrance with a main lobby. You can either make a turn to the left to go to the senior center, or go straight to community gym, youth, and then the facilities that support kind of those athletic activities. So the locker rooms are across from that, mechanical and support spaces, and then an area for future expansion that are shown in that zone. So we've got areas for the community to meet and do activities that are separate from the senior activities. And we've tried on each of these to kind of organize them from kind of quiet spaces near the front and billiards and table tennis in the back. So on each of these, the billiards and table tennis, we're trying to keep away from the lounge space and the fireside. So where we might want more quiet activities, there's zone here with the restrooms, kind of back. That's very, I keep addressing the seniors, but that's very similar in concept to the way the space is now. Even though these are shown as squares, it's really saying this is the program area. So that whole zone can be mostly open, and just like this room, that portion is where the board is sitting. This portion is where the public is sitting. But this is one room. As we plan it and we do bubbles, there might be a bubble that shows the board and a bubble that shows seating like this is shown here. But it can be one room, and the library area is there, and the fireplace area is there, and then the place to play cards is over here, and the restrooms are right off that space. So don't worry that we don't have, that each room is not separate. That being said, like this is a wellness room. This is a wellness room, and this is a room for table tennis. So those would be separate spaces because they're different functions. Hopefully that's clear. I think that's probably, on each of the concepts, we're showing opportunities for outdoor seating, whether that's near the front door or similar to what we have here at the park with some outdoor seating opportunities, or overlooking the roofs.
If I could, before you jump out.
Yes.
I do see a question in the public. We don't usually allow for questions, but in this case, go ahead.
Thank you for letting me ask. But I just realized that there is no space for what we do jazzercise, which would take a room this size, open, for just jazzercise, and that was one of the key things that we talked about. But I mean, I know the squares are set out just to indicate areas, but I don't see anything that allows for that.
So I will respond and say, so the open wellness is 1,300 square feet, which is probably about the size of this room here, this one. And then we have equipment in another one for zones of activity, storage between them. And then we do have a large, 2,100 square foot space that is in the community center side that has so we go from 1,300 up to 14,000 square feet of space. So depending on the size of the program, there will be different size spaces.
Thank you. Member Vagnozzi.
Just for everybody's clarification, can you indicate what part of this would be built if it was senior only? In terms of coming down here, there is a line across, but I don't think it's in the right spot.
So the line across on this, the zones that are green are senior program spaces. The salmon color and the blue are community center spaces.
And one of the charges that we had heard from the last meeting, or had come out of the last meeting, was to, again, reduce the senior center size by 15% or whatever that was, right? And to the point earlier, that was, the only way to kind of get to that point was to then remove some scope, some program, which could go back into it, but, so as part of that, it was, okay, there are spaces that can still have jazzercise, and all those types of activities that are still in these planes right here. But there's the one. Oh, no, yeah, like in that open wellness area right there. That is right smack right in the middle of the senior center. It can be used for that. The one that we have been talking about as well, that in order to reduce the size, the square footage, to get it down into to, I guess, address the ask of the task force, then we had to move one of the other spaces out of the senior center to reduce that size of that square footage.
Thank you.
I'm trying not to get into weeds too much, but you're gonna need, if you build this as a senior center only, you've got the entrance down here, lobby, you've got a fairly large chunk.
If it was built senior center only and the decision was not to build a community center,
Yeah.
I would say this whole zone would need to be reworked.
Okay.
It's really shown as one
Okay.
facility. If we're doing half of the facility, I absolutely agree, that kind of connection point between the two needs to change because half of the admin goes away. We don't need a lobby like we would for the size groups that would be over here. And so there's definitely a difference. If the direction is senior only, no community center, then it would, when we get deeper into the weeds, we would certainly rework it.
Okay.
Ms. O'Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence. I think as far as Steve's question, then this task force is charged with bringing a proposal for a standalone senior center to the township board. What are you proposing that they take to the township board for? They never want to do that.
So I'll jump in on that because, my direction to them all along has been this drawing with a line so that we can take this side of the line forward as a standalone senior center or the entire thing as a senior community center. It's not perfect, as we laid out, as we've discussed, right? There's, I think, always going to be a little bit of blurring of the edges that we're going to have to coordinate as we move forward here. But either one of these options, realistically, you could cut at the dotted line and say senior-only facility, or combined, they work as a senior community center.
Yes, Member Vagnozzi.
Indulge me. I think it would help. The larger version of this that just shows, that has more of the land, has a different demarcation line. And that one makes sense. So I think what I'm going to propose, unless there's an objection, that we just ignore the line on the tighter diagram for discussion purposes, and because all the functions you would need are there. I mean, to do a senior center only, if you put the line where it is on the diagram with more land, it it gets all of the functions.
Yeah, I think, my understanding though is, Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that to move the line to where Member Vagnozzi is suggesting doesn't take the 10 to 15% size reduction that was requested at the last, the 2 meetings ago. Is that
Okay.
accurate?
Correct.
So that's a 20,000 square foot facility then at that point.
That's correct.
Okay. So it's fine if that's what this task force wants to recommend. I just want to be, upfront about the fact that it's going to, the size is much bigger than what is there now, which we've heard a couple of times from communications that was not something that the seniors were interested in, a much bigger facility. And the cost will obviously commensurately be higher for whatever is happening in that area as well. So just as long as everyone's aware that that's what is being discussed, I want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
The difference is between these, this one has all the administrative offices in the senior center. The other
Yes.
one does not. So it's not really apples to apples. Maybe it's golden delicious to Jonathan.
All right. If you would, please.
And to your point, that dotted line might just remove the administration area. This one is far simpler in that it's a longer administrative area and it's very easy to cut with that in the middle.
Okay.
The drivers. So I'll switch over to this concept plan. That being said, they are the same areas, same square footage. It's apples to apples, maybe like you say, one's a yellow, a Jonathan, and the other one's a pink lady, or, they're different apple types, but it's certainly the same, they're both apples. Again, we're looking at, on this concept, focusing the senior center and those activities to the wetland. We've got a main entrance here with activity lounge up near that front entrance. To your point, the multi-purpose space across the way here with views out and access to a courtyard. Oh, sorry, I'm on.
Yep.
Yep, on that.
Thank you.
And then the louder, more active wellness and billiards are at this end of the building. So most of the meeting spaces and functions are getting a view out. On this, some of those activity spaces are still on the parking lot side, but it could be organized. To your observation, we've got a administrative space that kind of connects the two buildings together. And in this concept, if you had a Little League or Pee Wee basketball, you might bring them in here for convenience directly into the gym. But this is the space that we would have a receptionist, and that's kind of the main entrance to the building. Similarly, we've got, similar to the other plan, we've got activity space in the things that support the gym along here. So we've got locker rooms, restrooms, public meeting spaces. Again, the public meeting spaces facing the wetland as well, and then the youth program up near the road. Questions or comments on this concept?
Task force members, any questions or comments? Yes.
I just keep thinking about where we started this conversation of not even really having an idea of where this land might be, that we're trying to put these, a facility that might accommodate both a senior center or a combined. And I just really do appreciate, echo other task force members, comments about just appreciation for coming together with concepts, but also I was fairly satisfied with the description of, if the line was here, this section would have to be rethought and reconfigured, as long as we're all in understanding of making sure that we meet the program needs for the senior center, if we were to go with just the senior center only. And, and so I can appreciate kind of the description of this line here, that line there. Like, I think that, just to echo what Superintendent Hood said, like, there's I think that's all far within the details that will be decided upon later, as long as we can come to some agreement that conceptually, this is meeting the needs of what the seniors wanted and obviously with what the community input has been providing for the community center. I'm fairly satisfied. So I just wanted to share that with my other task force members that I think it's hard for me when we start slicing and dicing and saying this could go there, that could go there. It feels like we're stepping over, what our charge is a little bit. But I appreciate the conversation because it helps us visualize this conversation we're trying to have. But I feel fairly satisfied.
This is not the moment to decide where the vending machines go officially. We appreciate that. Member Nato-Farris.
I said, based on the last layout that you're on, I tend to prefer that for layout and sighting.
Which one? Sorry.
It just seems to work better. The parking seems to be closer to the entrance. It provides a little separate area for a possible senior parking area and maybe the provision of a secondary entrance out to the mall room.
Yeah. And something that we haven't really discussed because it's in both plans, so we didn't talk about it. But I very much appreciate the inclusion of a possible wetland boardwalk. A really cool feature to use the natural site. Obviously, I'm catching Dan Opsmer's eye. He's giving me the stink eye for the anticipated expense of all of that. But it is a really cool idea that if one day the township has enough money to build, it would be a really exciting path forward. Because I think it would be a really nice site to walk around if given the opportunity. So we're not going to force anything into this by saying we should include it in the original budget, but just point out that it's nice to have that gamed out so that we know that something like that is possible. And when Dan gets through the other 150 miles of the township potholes that need to be fixed, this is a good one to tack on to the end of the list. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, one more comment. It's just, I think, is this A, considering that one, this would be considered A, is much, I think, much better for the senior center in the sense that we're not looking at the parking lot for along the road in the wintertime. There's not going to be any, we don't really have any noise. I just think the parking lot would be much better. You have here, there'd be dedicated spaces for seniors.
It's just as a general overview, I agree. I think we'll call this the boomerang design, I think is my preferred version of these two. I think not that we're considering any future expansion because we haven't done anything yet. I think that the location of the potential future expansion down the line is a good space, although we'd have to make sure that we are thinking to the future in terms of how we prepare for that kind of expansion, if that's something that's desired. Because it's not a natural connection to the rest of the building. Yes.
I'm very appreciative of the concepts. I do conceptually prefer this boomerang one as well. The most frequent feedback I do hear from the seniors is actually about parking and accessibility. If you can't get close enough to be able to walk in, you're not going to use the facility. And that has been something that the district has taken very seriously, and we hear from the seniors, we have to have accessibility, we have to have accessibility, we have to have accessibility. So I would just want the commitment that, this is conceptual, but to really bring the seniors to the table and have someone with the expertise to make sure that it is accessible, there's enough spots, and people can get to and in the center so they can enjoy it. So just from my 15 years in Okemos and being a principal at Chippewa where the senior center is and now the superintendent, so it's just parking, we'll make it work. It is on the minds daily of our seniors in terms of their quality of experience getting to and from it.
Member Robertson and Member Steve.
Quick question as it relates to the outdoor activity patio for the boomerang diagram. Has that been factored in from a cost perspective, or is that just more of a conceptual hold that could be that?
It's a conceptual hold.
So the budget benchmarking that we had done, again, was based on those two facilities, right? The Zhang Senior Center, which now in Portage, and then the Greenville YMCA. So really, we were taking those as kind of, the square footage, up to $1 per square foot on those, escalating it up so that you have an idea between like a pre-eng building, because one of them had a lot more of it was pre-eng, and the cost was lower, and then you had other where it was conventional, and the cost was higher, and materiality and all that, right? So those would give you more of that. The site, from the site standpoint, we tried to accommodate, especially, down here, right? We know that we have a lot of site work that we have to do on this site, and so we tried to accommodate a lot of that. A lot of the particulars then are, okay, we can accommodate some of that stuff that's in there, but then maybe other things have to give up a little bit more, whatever the case is. Because we didn't go very specifically into each element on this yet to know, is the entire boardwalk in there for our own other things. Or get us in a benchmark range and types of building construction.
Sure. I mean, you obviously see a lot of outdoor activity patios that do face parking lots, but I do like the boomerang option with it being in the back, away from the parking lot. It's kind of nice, but just my comment. Thank you.
Member Steve.
I'm sorry, to talk about the parking one more time. I think it's important to note that we're not just talking about having handicap accessible spaces, that most seniors on any given day, something is not working as well as it did the day before. And so I think it's important that we're not just narrowing down X number of handicap accessible spaces. Thank you.
In terms of and I can only draw on my experiences from OCMS, we went through this preliminary design, came up with an estimate, then we, get the approval, and then we really design and get a, DD, an estimate, and build, and now we're running into the escalation was more than we expected, and we have tariffs potentially coming online that could impact conceptually where we're headed here. So I just want to make sure that any budget that we decide, has some ample predictions built in for contingency for what we can best predict now, because I fear that if, we're at Okemos, we're having to get really creative to follow through on all our promises because the dollars aren't going as far as they need to, and I just want to make sure that that's a thought here now, so we can have ample dollars in whatever design we choose, not knowing, but predicting forward as best we can.
Yeah, and certainly, our mission and our task force is to make some recommendations. The board will, of course, make their determination in terms of the overall budget and
okay.
what to ask for when the ask time comes.
Got it.
But I certainly do appreciate the insight because, we are in a relatively unpredictable moment in time when it comes to construction costs and materials costs. So it's good to have that in mind.
The last thing we want to do is spend all this time on this and then we can't afford to do what we wanted. Now you're going to get this.
Right. Yes.
What we did include in the budget benchmarking, again, we took the dollar per square foot of the actual built for those two projects, and then we escalated it up because we know what construction escalation costs are to date.
Right.
But then what we don't know was the next year. But what we did was we did escalate it up another 5% for another year because that's a typical construction. So let's throw out COVID, let's throw out tariffs, right? Because those are anomalies that go up and down, right? Just like a standard typical construction year is 4 to 6%, give or take. So we split the middle on that. We just said, okay, look, let's just put 5% on it for now because then we're escalating it up to today plus another 5% to be building a year from now-ish. So that's what we've included in there. So that we're at least thinking ahead to, okay, if this goes next year now, if this were to go in 2 years from now, we need to readdress things, right? Because we can only plan so much into hard numbers.
Thank you. Thanks. Other questions? Turn it back over. Oh, I see Mr. Opsimer's got a thought or two.
Yeah, so just one other thought as it relates to parking and ADA accessibility for the facility. When you see the crosswalks that are on the concept plans before you, one thing that we can easily do is do a raised crosswalk where it's at the top of the curb height, and it acts also as a speed bump to calm traffic coming through the site. So essentially, it's a trapezoid, and the sidewalk is at the top of the trapezoid. For anybody that wants to experience one for themselves, please drive through Donnelly Elementary at Hagedorn and Lake Lansing, southeast corner. They have one right in front of the elementary school there, so after hours, stop by and take a look. I think it's a great feature, calming traffic, and it makes everything accessible. There's no ramps, you're walking straight across at the top of curb elevation.
Yeah, Bennett Woods has that as well in their drive,
Yep,
drop-off lane.
yep, very good point. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, we'll turn things back over to you for whatever is left.
Frankly, I would say we've presented the concepts.
Okay.
And I can answer any additional questions, but I think we've probably covered the differences between the two concepts. And I'd reiterate, we're the same square footages, the same features on both concepts.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Well then, brings us to our discussion, and I'd like to just open the finality of this by saying we do not necessarily have an obligation to have a decision this evening. However, it makes things far more challenging for the Township Board if we do not have a decision this evening. The intent would be to give them 2 meetings to introduce and decide on, or discuss and decide on whatever goes forward here. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity to follow their procedure and do that. And so I would like it if we can come to a decision on making recommendations to the board, that we do so at this meeting. Understanding that there'll be 2 more public input points before anything is decided from a budgetary perspective. And then, of course, plenty of time after that to work out design details about the specifics of the layouts and whatnot. Member Bagnozzi.
Can you share what level of detail we should be targeting to present to the board? Are we talking about, I guess the question is, one is we could say square footage. Look, we want, we want a senior center of X size, and then the community center portion of Y size, and leave it at that point? Or do you want something that says between these 2 options that that we recommend the boomerang?
Right. I think from a ease perspective, we'll sort of have to take it in chunks, right? If there is one of these 2 the programs are what we're essentially deciding upon. If we prefer one layout or the other, I don't mind recommending a layout. I think it's going to be wise for the Township Board to see both anyway, just in case there's some significant disagreement. But the truth of the matter is that the programs that have been provided, as the consultants mentioned, are relatively similar. So it's okay for us to say, we submit these 2 programs as senior center and senior community center to the board for their approval. I think it's also worth pointing out that if we have any major qualms with the staffing plans that we discussed at our last meeting, this would be an opportunity to talk through those, because obviously those have major implications from a financial perspective. My personal opinion on that, not to get too deep into it, is that we're pretty much at there's not a whole lot of fat to cut out of the staffing perspective. And so the cost savings will likely be from a square footage perspective in the actual buildings themselves. And that'll have both building and operational savings over time. So I think those are probably the 2 areas that we need to weigh in on. Otherwise, they will have the meeting minutes and the packet from at least this meeting, I'm sure, in order to work off of. And, of course, our recommendations. Yes, Member Noto-Ferris.
I think it's important that we make our recommendation tonight. I think if we go further, we'll continue to get into the weeds. I believe that the task force has covered their charge, that we've cited the building, that we've looked at options, that we've looked at programming, that we've looked at operational costs. I think beyond that, it goes to the board. And I personally don't see any advantage in us meeting again. I mean, it'd be great to see everybody. I think we will continue to just get into the details that are not our purview. And I am comfortable myself in actually recommending one of the options that includes, my preference is the Concept A, the boomerang plan, that includes the senior center. So our two options would be the senior center that's included in this plan as a subset, or the overall. I believe the siting is preferred, and based on the discussions I've heard tonight, the changes that could and will be made in the future are not the purview of this particular task force.
I should clarify, thank you for bringing that up, and I should clarify that I suppose the siting would be the third piece of our recommendation, although, as we've come to find out, there's really only the one site that's available, so. Members
They need to know that, Jerry.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Would it be beneficial, do you think, if we asked them to present the standalone as a standalone drawing for that meeting as well, maybe somebody else doesn't prefer the boomerang, but every conversation we've had so far it prefers that, but if they would provide a standalone option so that they have that, and we don't have to have them speculate what's in there and what's not, even if it is not the size we were talking.
Sure. Is that possible from our consultants?
It certainly is possible. Maybe one point of clarification that will guide Adam in how he arranges everything. Is that to be determined? Are we planning on having the rest of it to be added on in the future? So basically, put a standalone building that can be added on in the future, or is it just no standalone and we're never going to?
I think for the purposes of what we show to the township board, in my opinion, would be to present basically the senior center in its full, detail, and then perhaps a building envelope that's sort of grayed out as, similar to how you've done for the future expansion here.
Yeah.
Then indicate that as a possible future community center expansion.
Good. So yes.
Yes, Member Steve.
And I agree. I don't see any reason not to move along tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Member Hood?
I just want to say I agree with the comments from our fellow members.
Member Vagnozzi?
I don't want to sidetrack this, but in the March 7th memo we got, at the bottom of the first page, there was a discussion about the fact that the community center is oversized compared to what the 10% reduction, and they listed 3 possibilities. Do we need to address those tonight, or do we just let that ride?
So that's entirely the determination of the task force, right? Essentially, what the direction that we had given at our previous meeting in January was that we'd like to see 3 things, right? A senior center with a 10 to 15% reduction.
Right.
The community center proposal as is, with the square footage as is, and then a senior community center proposal with a 10 to 15% reduction. And I think what we've seen here is, in the conceptual diagrams and in the programs, a senior center with a 10 to 15% reduction. We see the community center at the full size. We just don't see the community center with a 10 to 15% reduction. And so what our staff is trying to indicate here is, if you want to see a 10 to 15% reduction in the overall senior community center, these are 3 options that the consultants have identified as possible paths to that number. So that's not an answer to your question, really, except to say that if the task force wishes to see a 10 to 15% reduction, we'll either have to simply tell them one of these 3 options is what we recommend, or shave 10 to 15% off the square footage of everything, and they've told us that that's a much more challenging prospect from a program perspective.
I'm going to share my opinion, and then we can have a discussion. I am concerned about the overall of both the construction cost and the operational cost of a 50,000 square foot building, just to round it. Okay. I've been provided with information of other communities that are struggling to cover the operational costs of their community centers. So I would support taking a hard look at seeing what kind of reductions could be made in the size of the community center portion.
Okay. So I also am concerned about what it would cost to operate this, right? The building is a one-time expense, and
Right.
we certainly know what that would be. I feel a lot better seeing these updated revenue numbers, not that we would necessarily plan to have those offset the costs of operating. But if we do see it anywhere near what is being, suggested for the, even the 65% capacity revenue, I think that the overall cost burden to our taxpayers would be much diminished over the course of time. Now, I believe, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, the recommendation will be to find a way to make this self-sustaining from a taxable perspective, and that's going to be sort of the ask of the board, is to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a place where we are having to use existing township budget to handle this. Is that a relatively decent encapsulation of?
I think staff has consistently throughout this couple of year process tried to ensure that the general fund and the parks funds are not subsidizing this project, because there's a lot of things trying to happen in both of those budgets. And so that is a fair encapsulation.
Thank you.
Can I just ask for clarification, would a 10 to 15% reduction in the footprint of the combined senior community center result in a substantial reduction in operating costs? I mean, I would imagine staffing would probably be pretty similar. You would, save a little bit on heating, cooling perhaps, but I don't know if we've.
We certainly aren't going to lose the administrative, aspects. You'd still be programming for much the same number of activities unless you fully got rid of the youth space, for example, which I think would be a huge blunder. But Dan perhaps can talk a little bit more to the staffing, but I don't think you'd lose a whole lot by just taking about 5,000 square feet out.
Yeah, you were on the right course right there, right? The gas and electric savings, roughly $2 per square foot could be deducted. And then, of course, some of the contractual services. So carpet cleaning, custodial, things like that would scale proportionate to square footage. But the staffing, if we're looking at a 10% reduction, we're probably not talking about changing the staffing model.
Yeah. And so essentially then what we're talking about is minor changes to the operations and perhaps a slightly larger impact on the build cost. Right. But again, that's a one-time thing that you're going to save some on, but not a tremendous amount of money.
And what I'm hearing from the options is that it would be in order to cut 10 to 15% out, it would likely result in a loss of some aspect of the programming, such as youth programs, which were a high priority for this project.
And we see is a relatively high, comparative to other activities, high revenue generating component of it. So you'd also lose out on the possible revenue of those activities.
Okay.
That's $80,000 a year in camps and clinics. I assume that's the youth camps that we're talking about as well. And that's not nothing.
There's a lot of demand for that, for sure.
I can tell you, as someone who missed the Sporties for Shorties sign-up window by about 2 hours, it's full.
Yes.
And I'm upset about it. So there's definitely need for more around here. They're amazing.
I think Director Schmidt had mentioned parks millage monies. And I do think we would probably need to take a look at if park millage monies could even be used on the center itself, or on the community senior center, and maybe a check with an attorney. I know that from my experience, the park facilities need the revenue they have currently to maintain and manage and upkeep our current park system. And so for park millage money to be used for this on top of a millage for community center would be of detriment to the grounds in our community and the parks.
I think, just to clarify, I think you were talking about the fund balance from the community services millage, not the parks millage earlier. Is that accurate?
Yeah, what I was talking about before was the community services millage. Completely agree, former Director Mason,
Great,
that the goal is to keep whole existing funds.
Any other discussion? Okay, well, let's take the easy one first. Is there any objection to using the central fire station site as our location of recommendation to the township board? All right, well, that was nice and easy.
Thank you.
Good evening. That's, seeing no objection, that'll be our recommendation. Do we wish to recommend one of these conceptual plans or the other? I've heard a number of people speak up about the boomerang plan. Is that one that we're feeling more comfortable from a building envelope and layout perspective as our preferred
concept?
With the idea of a conceptual drawing of, with that similar layout with just senior
Yes.
center. I think I'm in favor of that, just to be able to see it.
All right, any objection to that being our recommendation as our preferred model? And we may yet need to still show the other one, but this is the one that we're putting our stamp of approval on. Okay. So then, on to the staffing. Any discussion on staffing or operational costs as they've been laid out to us at both our February meeting and tonight?
I believe that'll be tweaked in the details.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing when the township board and budgetary times come up. It will be determined what is actually needed for this facility, and how much we need to get involved in that piece.
Okay, anyone disagree with that sentiment? All right, then we're relatively happy with letting them make their decisions on that. And then finally, the square footage and programming. Any discussions on where we're at here? I know Member Bagnosi had brought up the possibility of looking at a possible reduction in the square footage of the Fellow Senior Community Center, if that's our proposal going forward. Any additional thoughts on that?
I had a question, is that something that could be tweaked or adjusted at the township board level?
It certainly could. However, I'm sure that they will take our recommendation with the weight of a group that's been working on this for now 9 months. So it is important that we make sure that we're happy with what we're recommending. And if they choose to make some changes, that's of course their prerogative. Yes, Member Steve.
I think it's important that this has something for everybody in the township. And so if the reduction means reduction to youth programs, I don't see that as a good trade-off. And so I'm comfortable letting them make that call. But I think it has to have something for everybody, or it's not going to be successful.
Any other thoughts? So are we relatively comfortable with recommending the two programs as they were provided this evening? With, I guess, did we make changes to the line? No, that was in the other one. Yeah, so then we're relatively happy with what was presented in the boomerang in terms of the program for that as well. Without objection, we make our recommendation then.
Yeah, I would ask that my concerns be noted in the minutes.
We can certainly make that happen.
Okay?
Okay, so then I guess for the sake of formality, we should probably take a single full vote on the whole thing. And so is there anyone who feels comfortable encapsulating that in a motion? I know we don't have that written out, but we can sort of cross-reference back to the previous discussion, I think, and that would be enough to give our staff direction to move forward here.
Instead of boomerang, is there an official label for that?
Yes.
Plan A.
Just a second.
Concept one, or
If we're talking about
It wasn't, I mean.
this
it's-
one, correct?
Yeah, I think if we make a
Or no, it's
motion, it
this
should be
one.
like 2 or 3 different. One is for the site.
A,
and one
option
is
B,
for the
yeah.
combined,
Yeah.
one is for the-
Concept-
This one, correct?
Concept one.
Or we can just make a
So
motion to.
it's the senior center south.
Everything is discussed.
Internally, we've been talking north versus south.
Senior Center South.
Senior center south.
Okay, that's pretty
Okay.
clear.
So then we'll go back to the beginning and start from the beginning. Do we have a motion on the site location of the proposed plan? Yes, Member Steve.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the site between the fire station and the post office as the site for the senior center or the senior community center.
It's been moved by Member Steed, supported by Member Hood. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All righty. Do we have a motion on the staffing plan as presented by staff this evening?
It's a trickier motion based on the conversation we had. I move to approve the staffing plan as presented, acknowledging possible future adjustments that might be necessary based upon changes outside the scope of this task force.
Yay.
It's kind of hard.
always have an out clause.
You like that? Yeah.
Yeah, we really found a way to dodge our way around that one. Any discussion?
Leave them for decision making.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Then next would be on the matter on the preferred site plan. We had been discussing the Senior Center South site conceptual plan. Do we have a motion on that this evening? It's tricky when we don't have them written in advance, I'll
Yeah.
tell you that much.
All right.
Member Maisner.
All right, I make the motion to recommend to the Township Board the concept plan with the Senior Center South with the combined community senior center facility,
Okay.
right?
So we have a
Is
support.
that sufficient?
I think, I think it would
Can
be.
somebody tweak it?
I think it would be I think if we're going to tweak it, it would be recommended for either the standalone senior center or the senior and community center.
True, I didn't know if we needed the standalone as a separate
I think
motion.
we can do them both.
Oh, okay, I thought that would be another motion coming up. Okay, either the Senior Center South combined community senior center or the senior center only
Okay.
plan. Thank you.
Member Hood.
I just want to note that, again, that that's conceptual and there's further work to be done by the township board and the
Right.
stakeholder groups. So this is just broad conceptual. I just want to make sure that's noted. as
Right,
well.
maybe add that to my motion, broad conceptual plan.
All right.
I like
We'll
it.
find a way to put that language in there somehow. I did not hear a support, though. I do need a second for that motion. Supported by Member Steed. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, last up. We'll take this one in 2 bites, just to make sure we're being accurate in case somebody wants to make a caveat. Would be the approval of the conceptual program for Meridian Township Senior Center No Gym as proposed. With a motion on the Senior Center standalone No Gym program.
Somebody moved,
Member
and I have
Vagnozzi.
a comment. Want me to comment first, or?
We'd like to have the motion first.
I understand.
Yeah. Anyone like to make that motion? Member Robertson.
Make the motion to support the Meridian Township Senior Center with no gym plan.
Do you have a support?
I support.
Supported by Member Malley. Any discussion? Member Vagnozzi.
Since we're now approving something that actually has individual functions listed, senior center only needs to have a unisex bathroom, and this plan does not have it.
That is absolutely something we'll pick up yeah, that's going to be a code requirement that we run into, and apologies you've mentioned that before, and I should have remembered that.
I think family toilet was the answer to that, but
But it's only in the combined plan.
no, it's at the bottom, building support. Women's toilets, men's toilets, family toilet.
Okay, all right.
I'm not looking at the big.
No,
blown up
you're
one.
fine, and I retract that.
Yeah, it is at the very bottom. I apologize. I forgot that I did catch that, and we did include it. Good job.
All right.
Good staff.
Thanks,
here.
Brendan and Adam.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, then all those in favor of the senior center no gym plan, conceptual plan, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next.
Why would we be supporting the plan with no gym?
The senior center standalone. But, yeah, and just as a reminder, the reason we're doing this way is because our charge was to present two plans, right? One with just a senior center, one with senior and community center. So then, our final motion of the evening will be about the Meridian Township Senior Center and Community Center with gym conceptual program. Do we have a motion for that this evening?
I move to approve the programming as outlined for the senior community center. Come on.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Member Nagasetti. Member Agnosi.
Sorry, being picky. How do we indicate to the township board that that we're not recommending everything exactly to the square footage that's here? Because what we're giving them is something that says we approve this. What we're approving here is more space than programming.
Program is just what we've called it. The programming in this case is the amount of square footage set aside for various things.
I'm going to suggest an amendment to the motion.
Please.
With the understanding that the detailed entries on these are subject to revision. Okay. Just want to protect ourselves.
Understood.
Okay. And if somebody has a better way to word that,
Member Nato Ferris, are you comfortable with subject to revision?
No.
No? Okay. So then we'll need to make it a formal motion. If you'd like to move that, we can second and have a vote.
okay. You want me to make a motion for the whole thing?
To motion to amend.
Motion to amend? Okay, I move that we amend the
previous motion.
The previous motion to indicate the ability to reallocate the spaces.
Okay.
Based on future input.
Okay. Do we have a second for that motion? Seeing none, motion fails without support.
Understand.
Okay, any further discussion on the senior and community center with gym proposal? Concept plan. Program. Words. Okay, conceptual program. Member Steve.
Just because we don't put that language in now doesn't mean the board can't make a change.
Right.
This is just our recommendation
Correct.
as it is.
We are making our recommendation.
As
The
is.
board, of course,
The board can
is,
still change anything they
yes.
jolly well want.
They are, yes, these are recommendations only. The
Yeah.
board is welcome to make changes as necessary, even without that inclusion in the motion.
And if I may, in my experience as well, just during the design process and with the budgeting process, that's going to naturally happen anyways.
Yeah.
I see that as a given.
Yeah,
So not that it won't be addressed, but not necessary for the motion.
thank you.
Okay.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Thank you very much. Motion carries. All right. Folks, I think that does it. That brings us, I believe, unless staff has indication that we've missed something that we need to recommend, Mr. Schmidt? No, okay. Very good. That brings us finally to our last opportunity for public remarks. I have a number of folks who have previously requested to speak at the end of the meeting as well. And so we'll start, the same rules apply. So think back in your heads on what I told you before. First, we have Suzanne. Suzanne. Would you like to speak at this public remarks?
Sure, very briefly.
Okay. And then Barbara, you'll be up second, if you'd like to.
Do I have to go through the whole thing again? Suzanne Lay Aloha in Lake of the Hills.
Thank you.
I want to thank these two gentlemen for all the work. I know you've done an awful lot of work, and I want to thank the task force as well. But could somebody, and it's probably a lot to do with my hearing aids, please clarify what you just approved? Because it was really hard to hear some of the members speaking on what you were approving to present to the board.
We can do a recap in a moment. That'd be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Barbara O'Kelly. And then Sonia. I'm sorry, you did only check the one box. My apologies.
Barbara O'Kelly from Okemos. Again, I want to thank you. I just want folks to know that there is a meeting tomorrow morning of the advisory board for this current senior center. I will bring to them, Steve and I will bring to them the decisions that the task force has made tonight, and then we will let you know what we think, and also the township board. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak this evening? Seeing none, public comment is closed at 7:47 p.m. Member Vagnozzi.
Can you share when you expect this to be on the agenda for the township board? Because we're being broadcast or recorded?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to look back at the back of Mr. Dempsey. I can't recall, it's not on our meeting for Tuesday. So it'll be on our first and second meetings in April. And Mr. Schmidt's pulling up the calendar to tell you exactly when those are, because I've got my Tuesdays all mixed up. I think it's actually Thursday, April.
Say Thursday. Yep, it's the 3rd and the 15th.
Yeah, so Thursday, April 3rd, and Tuesday, April 15th, at the very least, are the two first opportunities that the board will be talking about it. It's possible that that extends to our first meeting in May, which will be on the 8th, I believe, because there's an election on the 6th of May. So, anyway, that will be when this comes before the board. At the very least, starting April 3rd. Okay?
Is somebody giving a report to the board?
Yes, I will be. And staff, of course, will present it as a part of their typical presentation at board discussion. Well, given that this is our last meeting, I do want to express my sincere gratitude to the members of the task force who have taken time out of their lives every Tuesday, once a month, every Tuesday, to come be a part of this. I think this was overall a very open and transparent process, and has invited a lot of input from a lot of key stakeholders. And I'm very hopeful, based on our meetings here, the input from the public, that we will have a very good plan coming out of this group's work, and hopefully the township board agrees with that recommendation, or with that sentiment anyway. I very much appreciate each and every one of you being a part of this. And also to our members of the public who have been steadfast in coming to these meetings every month as well. We've got an engaged senior population, an engaged population as a whole, and we very much appreciate that in Meridian Township. So thank you to all of you as well. With that said, our last item is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Member Bagnozzi, supported by Member Maisner. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we stand adjourned at 7:50 PM.